of isolation, and thank you all for being so accommodating and allowing us to do this new and novel way of conducting a daily press conference whilst I'm isolating with COVID-19. It's a big campaign, and there's still lots happening out there on the campaign trail with our team out and about around the country, even though I'm stuck here in this hotel. We are seeing once again today another example of the National Party's numbers not adding up, and another example of the National Party supposedly giving with one hand whilst taking more from New Zealanders with the other. And I'm speaking here in particular of their decision to reverse the affordable water reforms, which is going to result in New Zealanders paying much higher rates bills should the government change and should National be in office. They've made no provision to support local authorities with the cost of upgrading New Zealand's rundown water infrastructure in their fiscal plan, and that means that the cost of that is going to fall to local ratepayers. The analysis is clear because it was done when we proposed the water reforms. In the absence of additional support from government, in the absence of significant reform, ratepayers will end up paying very, very significant rates increases. Another example today, the Mayor of Auckland has come out and talked about the huge hole that the National Party's decision to repeal the regional fuel tax will have for Auckland transport. Again, it's a huge hole in National's costings that they've got no way of filling, and Auckland ratepayers will ultimately end up paying more as a result of that. Again, the National Party purport to give with one hand, but in reality, they take a lot more with another. Now, given this is a relatively new way of doing this, and it's going to be much harder to control the flow of traffic, what I'm going to suggest is that people raise their hands if they wish to ask a question. I'll try and give the questioners a good run before switching to the next questioner, and we'll try and get through as many questions as possible by doing that. So I'm happy to open up for anybody to raise their hands, and we'll get straight into questioning. Jessica.
We've asked in our Vote Compass about likability with politicians. How important is it for politicians to be likable, do you think?
I think, politicians certainly need to be likable and trustworthy, but I think the issues that we put before the electorate are incredibly important. I think New Zealanders need to know that we understand the issues facing them, that the proposals that we're putting forward are realistic and credible, and that they can trust that we will actually do the things that we say we're going to do.
Out of 10, how likable are you?
I generally don't give myself ratings out of 10, unless I can absolutely not avoid it.
130,000 people out of the 400,000 plus we talked to actually put you as the most likable politician. Why is that not translating to party votes?
I've already acknowledged that at the moment, times are tough for New Zealanders, and it's natural when times are tough to be looking around and contemplating change. But my challenge to New Zealanders is, what kind of change do you want? Do you want to send the country backwards? Do you want to go back to having more children living in poverty, go back to not building state houses in the number that we're doing it, go back to not taking climate change seriously, or repeating the run-down nature of our health and education systems that we inherited when we became the government? We made progress on all of those fronts, and going backwards isn't the way to move the country forwards. So yes, change, it's natural to contemplate change, but be very careful about what kind of change you might end up getting.
Will Labor bring in a wealth tax? We heard Ingrid Leary's comments have surfaced as well. I mean, lots of your MPs now are coming out and saying they'll bring in a wealth tax.
Ingrid Leary was absolutely categorically certain that we would not be introducing a wealth tax.
Will you introduce a wealth tax, and why do your MPs think that?
That is not what Ingrid Leary said. She did not say we'd be introducing a wealth tax. In fact, she was very clear that we wouldn't. Okay. Anna.
Kia ora. How is the COVID going?
I'm feeling much better today, actually. So it's starting to clear. Obviously, COVID-19 knocks you around a little bit, but I'm certainly starting to feel a lot better today. I think give it another day or two, and I should be fighting fit. Certainly looking forward to getting back on the campaign trail on Friday.
Will you still have the momentum that you said that you were going to have this week? Will you be bringing that next week?
Oh, absolutely. It's really important as people start to think about how, shape up their final decisions around how they're going to vote. I'm looking forward to getting back out onto the campaign trail.
And just one last one. Why do you think that big issues that used to be quite in the public domain, such as climate change and child poverty, haven't really featured much in this campaign?
I think it's natural when the cost of living is, really crunching for New Zealand families, that cost of living is front and centre of their concerns in this election campaign. It's the reason why I set out a 10-point cost of living plan, because I know that that's what New Zealanders really want to see us focused on at the moment. It is a difficult time for New Zealanders, but I also know that New Zealanders also want to see that their government is focused on climate change, that we're focused on taking action around lifting children out of poverty, and that we're actually investing in the public services that they rely on, like health and education. Okay, News Hub.
Oh no. Okay. Just back on the point of Ingrid Leary, the Nats are saying that is proof that there's a plot to roll you. What do you make of that?
Well, Ingrid Leary specifically said that we weren't going to be introducing a wealth tax, that I'd made it clear that we weren't going to be introducing a wealth tax. I don't really understand what mischief they're trying to make here.
Would you go so far as to call it misinformation?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the National Party are desperately trying to distract from the fact that none of their own numbers add up. The reality is the National MPs are all happy to sign up to their fiscal plan because they've got no idea what's in it.
But we have now seen numerous members of your caucus come out publicly and support a wealth tax, which you have ruled out. So is the only thing standing in the way of the Labour Party implementing a wealth tax or a capital gains tax your leadership?
I think it's a bit hilarious, actually. Ingrid Leary made it very clear that while she wants to see a fairer tax system, which I also want to see, and our government is committed to a fairer, tax system. The Labour Party is committed to a fairer tax system. We've got a bill going through Parliament, or we just had a bill going through Parliament designed to achieve that. She's also been very clear that we're not introducing a wealth tax. So I think it's just mischief making by the National Party.
No, but the question is the only thing standing between the Labour Party implementing a wealth tax or a capital gains tax you?
No, we've made it absolutely clear we're not introducing a wealth tax. We've also been really clear that big changes like that need to be put before the electorate. We're not putting a big change like that before the electorate, so we won't be doing it.
And just on the press debate, do you have any update on where sort of negotiations are with that?
I've said that I'll make myself available as soon as I'm out of isolation. So anytime between Friday and Thursday next week, I'll go to Christchurch in order to be able to debate Christopher Luxon. So really the ball's in his court.
And is it really mature politics to be calling someone a chicken?
I think New Zealanders deserve answers to the questions that the National Party have so far refused to answer for the entire duration of this campaign. They're not telling New Zealanders what they're going to cut. Christopher Luxon's dodging any question that he doesn't like. The leadership debates are one of the few arenas in which he is forced to answer, or it becomes very, very clear that he's not answering. And I think as a result, he's running for cover because he knows that it will show him up.
Yeah, but does that really account to, or make the case for name calling?
Look, people can form their own judgments on that. Okay, Felix.
Thank you. So Winston Peters, New Zealand First, has announced a policy to make all conscience votes a referendum. What do you make of that policy?
I think New Zealanders elect parliamentarians to make decisions on their behalf. I don't think that we should have a conscience vote every time someone wants to make a change around alcohol laws or around gambling laws or the like. We had a referendum on a conscience vote issue, for example, which was the assisted dying bill, and New Zealanders supported the decision that the Parliament had already taken.
Do you think it would be a good use of taxpayers' money?
It'd be very expensive. It would be very slow, and it would actually prevent, reasonable changes in a whole lot of areas where I think the law should keep up with public expectations.
And just lastly, conscience votes are often around social sort of issues. Do you think putting them to a referendum would stymie social progressiveness?
Not necessarily, but it certainly would mean that a lot of issues might not progress. I suspect if many of the big changes that have been made over the history of New Zealand's political debate had been put to a referendum, it might have taken longer to effect change. But I think, overall, the arc of human history suggests that progress will still be made. Okay, Ben.
Thanks, Prime Minister. What a horrific flashback to a worse time this is. Just want to take you to the manifesto you put out on the weekend. One of those clauses is you're going to invite the head of the General Delegation of Palestine to present their credentials as ambassador to New Zealand. What shift are you trying to achieve here?
New Zealand's been committed for some time to a two-state solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. What we're indicating is that we want to open diplomatic channels with Palestine in the way that we have a diplomatic channel with Israel. So other countries have done the same, and we think that that's an appropriate thing to do.
Can you just be clear whether that's formal recognition of the Palestinian state, and what would you like to achieve with that dialogue?
It's not formal recognition of the Palestinian state at this point, but New Zealand's position of supporting a two-state solution remains in place.
And sorry, what would you like to achieve by opening that dialogue?
I think it's an indication, it's a further step in our ongoing commitment to dialogue in the Middle East, to supporting a two-state solution. And we see that diplomatic relations with both sides will help us to advance that cause.
Thank you.
Okay, MediaWorks, Israel.
Hey Chris, just wondering if you're confident that Labor actually offers enough to new mothers with National's health policy, including 72 hours of neonatal care that's free, and especially considering the debate that went on after Labor voted down their more flexible parental leave policy. Just wondering if you're confident that mothers should be confident in Labor's approach after the election.
The National Party's policy today really doesn't change anything. They announced 72-hour stays for women in hospital after when they campaigned back in 2009, and in reality, the average length of stays that women had in hospital following the birth of a child didn't change during that time. Women can stay in hospital for as long as they have a medical need to stay in hospital now. So if there's still a medical need there, then they're able to stay in hospital now, and I fully would support them in doing that. We've introduced in this election campaign a commitment to paid partners leave, so making sure that we're not just splitting up the existing paid parental leave entitlement between the two parents, but we're actually increasing it by allowing partners to take leave over and above the leave that's already made available. So there's no question that new parents would be better off under a re-elected Labor government than they would be under a national government.
And Chris, in terms of the free monitors for type 1 diabetes, is that something that Labor would look into after the election?
Well, we don't need to look into it. Pharmac have already indicated they're going to fund them. So that's going to happen anyway. So the National Party putting out a policy for something that's already going to happen, again, just sort of highlights the farcical nature of much of what they're doing in this campaign.
Brilliant. That's all, Chris. Thanks.
Thank you. Craig.
National has called on Labor to disavow the CTU's support after it issued a newsletter with incorrect claims about National. Will you do that?
Look, the CTU are more than capable of defending their own positions. I haven't seen the newsletter in question, but it's a question for the CTU. And I would say, the National Party have a number of front groups out there making all sorts of outlandish claims in this campaign, and I accept that that's just part of the campaign. But if I called a press conference and threw a wobbly every time they said something mean about me and said that it was all the National Party's fault, I'd be doing it on quite a regular basis. It's
not the first occasion that there has been misinformation put out there by Labor or its allies this campaign. Has that been, is Labor playing fair?
Look, I utterly reject it. The CTU are an independent organisation. They're entitled to make whatever claims that they want. But I'd point you to the information being put out by organisations like the Taxpayers Union, Groundswell and Hobson's Choice, which contains all sorts of quite outrageous claims about me and about the Labor Party. And, if the National Party want to get into defending the veracity of all of those claims, well, they're most welcome to do that. Thank you. Stuart.
Hello. David Seymour, Winston Peters, and even Raf Manji have all said they'd be happy to sub in and for Chris Luxon and debate you. next week. Any interest in any of those three?
I did look into this. There hasn't been a multi-leaders debate since about 2002, because I think in the leaders debates, people do want to see the people who could credibly be Prime Minister after the election debating the issues. And so I'm more than willing to do that with Christopher Luxon.
But no interest in taking on anyone, just for the sake of having that debate.
Look, there's been a multi-party debate already, involving the minor party leaders. I think what New Zealanders want to see are the two people who would be Prime Minister debating down in Christchurch as it was intended.
Given you're in isolation until at least Friday, are you still planning on casting an advance vote next week, or will you be saving it for Election Day?
I haven't actually figured out when and where I'm going to vote yet. I do like to be able to vote in my home electorate if I can. Given my schedule's all been, thrown somewhat into, turmoil as a result of my having to isolate, we haven't quite locked down exactly what I'll be doing for the 8 days or so after my isolation ends.
And do you think that, we've heard more accusations today effectively from Christopher Luxon about the negative campaign that Labor is allegedly running, more attacks coming at National again today, coming from you guys again today. Which party do you think is running the more negative campaign?
I think we're running a very positive campaign about the future of New Zealand, but I think Christopher Luxon and the National Party aren't answering any of the questions that are being asked of them. And I think New Zealanders do deserve those answers. If people are contemplating voting for National, voting for change, then they need to understand what the change that they're voting for actually is. I think the fact that Christopher Luxon's not willing to debate, that he's walking away from media questions and he's continuing to refuse information about National's actual plans for if they became government, I think should be a cause for significant alarm for New Zealanders as to exactly what kind of government they might get if they ended up with a National-led government after the election.
And apologies if I missed this earlier, but have you done another COVID test today?
I did, still positive, I'm afraid. So, and I'll keep testing daily.
Cool, thank you.
Relentlessly positive.
Indeed. Aaron.
Kia ora, Prime Minister. Hana Rafferty might be Clark, the candidate whose home was invaded, some of her personal belongings also photographed. What do you make of these types of stories coming out, including from across the political aisle? And do you see it as a bit scary for the state of politics in New Zealand?
I am concerned about the increased threat that seems to be out there towards democracy in general. And I think it's really important that any candidates or MPs or anyone else associated with the election campaign that finds themselves victim to this kind of behaviour reports that to the police immediately so that appropriate action can be taken. Everyone should be able to participate in the democratic process, including people whose views that we might strongly disagree with. They should all be able to participate in the democratic process without threat to their property, to their safety, or to their person. And I think it's really important that that people allow the course of law to come into play here, and that if anything illegal has happened, that's reported to the police and that appropriate action is taken.
You also mentioned earlier it's natural, quote, to be contemplating change. Is that an admission that you think Kiwis are shopping around this election?
I think Kiwis shop around in every election, and I think there's no question that they'll be looking around to see what the different parties are offering. One of the things that we're very focused on at the moment is making sure they understand the choices that they have in front of them. A choice between a government that is rebuilding our health system, our education system, that's building our infrastructure, that's sorting out our water, or a government that wants to go backwards on all of those things.
How tough is it to, I guess, work against human behaviour that likes the new shiny thing?
I think New Zealanders actually will give a bit of thought to how they vote before they vote at the next election. They've still got several days to go before we reach polling day, and I think New Zealanders will be weighing up all of the information that's presented to them. I think one of the reasons the National Party are running away from scrutiny and running away from debates is that they know that their numbers don't stack up, and they are worried that New Zealanders are starting to become aware of exactly what it is a change of government might mean.
Is there a cruel irony that in a campaign that's been kind of trying to move away from the pandemic that you end up in isolation with COVID?
Well, look, it sums up the last 3 years, really. COVID-19's disrupted a lot of people's lives, and they've certainly disrupted the government's activities over the last 3 years. And so right to the end. COVID has been here to disrupt this term of Parliament. But I think we've got reason for optimism. I think in the next term of Parliament, COVID will be less of a feature, but it's still a feature at the moment. And we are seeing a bit of an influx of, or an increase in cases of COVID in the community, and in fact around the world. Since I've been isolating, I've had messages from all sorts of people around the world saying, "Oh, there seems to be quite a bit of it about at the moment." And so, that's just the world that we live in.
Do you also, I guess, from a personal health point of view, there's been much conversation over the last couple of years from you yourself at the podium about the risk of things like long COVID or taking rest and taking care. Is that are you kind of between a rock and a hard place in terms of resting as well for you personally right at this point in time, and having an election campaign to run, given the risks we know around COVID?
Look, I'll rest as much as I need to, but I'm feeling reasonably energetic. I'm certainly feeling a lot better today than I was feeling yesterday. But actually, my main reason for isolating is I don't want to go and give COVID-19 to other people. It is a highly infectious disease. It's still a highly infectious disease. And when you have it, the responsible thing to do is to stay out of circulation and not give it to other people. Election campaigns put you in contact with a lot of people. And I think it would be really irresponsible of me to go out there and effectively, deliberately infect people with COVID-19.
And just lastly, some messages from overseas. Any prime ministers, anyone of note that's flicked you a text and sent well wishes?
Look, I'll keep that private for now.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Cheers, Aaron. Richard. You're on mute, Richard. While Richard takes himself off mute, here we go.
That?
That's much better.
Yeah, I can't hear you. Look, yesterday, David Parker announced the creation of a freshwater working group to look at water allocation issues, which would obviously include allocation to Māori. Is that an appropriate thing to have unveiled 11 days before an election?
Absolutely, I think it's an absolutely appropriate thing for government to continue to do. Freshwater allocation is going to continue to be, a big discussion topic for the government after the election, regardless of who the government is. We have a track record here of continuing to work collaboratively with the communities who have an interest in water allocation, and that's exactly what we'll continue to do.
But can you confirm that water working group will address the question of allocation of water to Māori?
Well, there's a lot of things that go into that question, Richard. The courts have already made some determinations around the Māori interest in water, and we're not proposing to overturn those determinations that have already been made. But of course, they have implications for forward decisions, and so I think a working group is one of the ways to work through that.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Richard. We'll go back to Anna.
I just have one more. Advanced voting numbers for yesterday are out, 56,000. So that's about half as many as last election. What do you think that shows?
It shows that there's still an awful lot of undecided voters out there. And so I don't think there's going to be the big rush to advance voting this election that there was in the last election. I think more people are going to be waiting to make up their minds relatively, close to election day, if not on election day itself. And so that means that the next, week and a half of campaigning is really important. MediaWorks again.
I suppose that quite nicely segues into my next question of, for many New Zealanders, they're really confused about who they're going to vote for. They constantly see in the headlines, National's got major fiscal holes, Labour's plan won't work, la da da. It all comes down to numbers. Are you concerned at all about New Zealanders who are actually unsure of what's the truth about fiscal plans, about alternative budgets? Because there are just accusations flying around and they have no real way of knowing what's the truth.
Well, the National Party like to say, that there's misinformation in this campaign, despite the fact that they can't actually answer the questions about their own policies. So, the fact that they've put out a fiscal plan there that doesn't stack up, that doesn't say how they're going to pay for the cuts that they're going to be making, I think should be cause for alarm for New Zealanders. New Zealanders do have a pretty clear choice at this point in the campaign. They've got a choice between a government that's lifting children out of poverty, that's bringing down our climate emissions, that's rebuilding our public health system, our public education system, that's rebuilding our infrastructure, that's tackling water reform, that's building more homes, or a government that wants to go backwards on all of those things, which is what would happen under a national government. They've said that they'll stop the state house building program. They've basically pledged to cut every initiative that we've got in place that's reducing climate change. They want to change the way benefits are calculated that will result in more children living in poverty. And we know from their past track record that they won't adequately fund health and education because that's what they did for the last 9 years they were in government. So we can continue to move forward or we can go backwards, and a change to a national government will very much send the whole country backwards.
And Prime Minister, just really very sharply changing tack. Recently, we saw a permanent representative of New Zealand to the United Nations, Caroline Schwalger, deliver a speech to the General Assembly on nuclear disarmament. She shared significant concerns about, verbatim quote, an unbridled arms race, and really reaffirming calls for the world to join in non-proliferation. I mean, is that something that you share concerns about with Caroline?
I think we live in an era of significant global volatility at the moment, and I think it's in New Zealand's interests, as it's in the globe's interests, for there to be a de-escalation in tension. And New Zealand diplomatically will continue to work towards that. We're absolutely committed to nuclear disarmament. We don't see nuclear weapons as being in anybody's interests. And certainly the use of nuclear weapons would be, as John F. Kennedy once described it, ashes in our mouths. It would be disastrous for humanity.
Awesome, that's all.
Thank you. Amelia, News Hub.
Hello, just off the back of Artura's question. So what is your position now on an independent election promise costing unit ahead of maybe the next election? Because, it doesn't seem like anyone can trust what a fiscal hole is anymore. So wouldn't that be the way to solve this?
Well, we've committed to an independent costings unit in the past, and ultimately it was the National Party that vetoed it. I think if there is a consensus on having one after the election, I'm absolutely committed to putting one in place. I think it would be good for democracy, and it would actually be good for good government, because it would mean that the policies that political parties were putting before the electorate were generally more robust than they perhaps have been in the past. So I think it's a very good initiative. It's why I supported it when we proposed it. That's why I was disappointed when the National Party vetoed it. And it's why I would support it if a proposal, in that regard came up after the election.
But would it need to be on a fully consensus though, or would you push forward with it if you were to win and get the numbers?
Look, I would like to see it put in place. The National Party, I understand now, seem to support the idea of a costings unit, having effectively vetoed it last time. And so I'd be very keen to see it move forward. Okay, any other last questions? Have I missed anybody? I don't think so. Okay, that might be it. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good afternoon.